there is no one Irish dish, I suppose,
Mm.
is what I'm saying. Like, Irish food tends, I mean, it's changed and changing, but one of the things is that it's still very much meat and two veg and potatoes, any number of potatoes, any type of potatoes. That is a stereotype that rings true. I can tell you, I have yet to meet a potato I didn't like in any way, shape, or form. And Irish people eat a phenomenal amount of potatoes. So
Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and in today's episode, it's St. Patrick's Day. And so St. Patrick's Day to happy St. Patrick's Day to all my wonderful listeners, and to my guest today, Colum.
thanks very much, Brendan. Happy to get a chance to chat to you on St. Patrick's Day, Ireland's National Day of Celebration, the day where everyone in the world is Irish if they want to be. And as we say in Ireland, Lá Féile Pádraig Guit, which is the Irish or the Gaelic for Happy St. Patrick's Day.
That's awesome. So yeah, it is, as Colum said, the national Irish holiday, the holiday where everyone shares their Irish or non-Irish heritage in the same ways. And it's a wonderful holiday that I've always actually had a lot of interest in. And so Colum actually reached out to me and requested to do an episode on St. Patrick's Day, all the festivals, the history behind it, all that kind of stuff. And so that's really what we're going to be diving into today. So I'm sure all of you guys remember Colum from a couple months back. He has a podcast all about counseling and advising for universities. And he actually just let me know about a new podcast that he's been working on lately. So Colum, why don't you go ahead and talk about both your projects and kind of tell people where they can find you?
Sure. Thanks, Brennan. So I suppose the new project is fitting for today because it's the Irish NFL show. And if people enjoy football or if they enjoy hearing four lads with funny Irish accents talking about football, they can find us on Twitter and on Facebook, but we're also released as a podcast. So we do video and audio podcasts for that. So whether you get your podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Irish NFL show, we've been very fortunate to be joined by some great guests. We had Peter King, and just last night we had Rich Eisen from the Rich Eisen Show join us. We've had Wade Phillips, and we actually got to cover the Super Bowl. We got media accreditation, so we got the players to talk to us, and I think they were amused by our funny Irish accents. So definitely check out the Irish NFL show. And just like you, we love the interaction with people. So please do reach out to us, say hello, and let us know what you think. And as you mentioned, I have been working in higher ed for 15 years, and I have a podcast called Adventures in Advising, and that is audio only, but you can find that wherever you get your podcast. So a great companion piece to Talk Ag to Me. We will be releasing episode 31 actually, and we that seems to be going very, very well. We're delighted with the response to it. So whatever area of higher ed people are involved in, be it as advisors, as counselors, as faculty members, even students themselves, there is something for everybody in this podcast. So definitely check us out, Adventures in Advising.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. And I definitely have listened to a couple of the episodes of your advising podcast, and that one was really interesting to hear about. So I'm sure people will, as you mentioned, love to hear your Irish dudes talk about some football, because everyone loves football and everyone loves the Irish accent for some reason. I can't really explain why, but it is something that's just, naturally draws the ear. Can't say it's not the same for myself, but yeah, so that's awesome. So I'll put all the links down in the description so you guys can go find all of Colum's great stuff and go and show him plenty of attention. And I think that's a good transitionary piece into our conversation today. So Colum, tell me all about St. Patrick's Day in its home country.
Well, the interesting thing about St. Patrick, firstly, is St. Patrick wasn't Irish. So
Really?
that yeah, that's probably quite surprising to people. But the story as it's told, and I'm sure there's plenty of myth and legend involved in this to an extent. But St. Patrick is Welsh,
Oh.
and he was actually kidnapped from Wales, and he was brought to Ireland, where he had to tend to sheep. So he acted as a sheep herder, and he was able to return to Wales, but he felt he had a calling to come back to Ireland and to bring Christianity to the people of Ireland. He felt that was his calling, and so that's what he did. He came back. I guess when people visit the little green island, they are somewhat enamored with it and they enjoy coming back. And that was the origin. So, that's why for me, it should be open to people from around the world to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. It's definitely not an Irish only festival, given that it is celebrating a Welsh national who became beloved of the Irish people, and there are numerous examples of that. I mean, we love to see people with any sort of Irish connection or who enjoy Ireland come. I mean, for America, look, JFK here in the 80s, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm not making this up. People in Ireland in their houses would have had kind of, say, two pictures. One would have been of Jesus, the Sacred Heart picture. I don't know if people might be familiar with that, but people in Ireland would have had that, and they would have had a picture of JFK as well. He was that beloved in Ireland, and anyone who has any kind of tangential connection to Ireland, certainly they get adopted. Jeremy Irons, the actor, he has a castle and he lives here now, and Dominic West from The Wire, we've adopted him as well. So we love to do that, but it continues to this day, and so that's why I feel it's a worldwide celebration. But that is the man we are celebrating, and of course then there's the story that he drove the snakes out of Ireland, which is why we don't have any snakes. You could also say maybe it's where the fact that we're an island nation and it is a very temperate climate. But no, let's go with the fact that St. Patrick drove all the snakes out of Ireland. But that's another kind of myth and legend that exists. So there's lots of little mini myths that you hear, and the interesting thing is, in different parts of the country, there are different St. Patrick stories about maybe miracles that he performed when he visited that part of the country. But it is a national holiday in Ireland. It is a day where everyone does celebrate in some way, shape, or form. And the celebrations have probably changed over the years and the way in which it is celebrated. But I think even the fact that it is Ireland's National Day of celebration, we don't have an Independence Day in the way that you would have in America. So this is our national holiday.
Huh. That's awesome. So would you be able to kind of give us a little bit of a look into, well, obviously, if circumstances were normal, what would a St. Patrick's Day celebration look like in 2021 and today?
Sure. So I think this is where it's such a shame, because the way in which it had been growing and developing was really cool. It had become a kind of a festival, a real celebration, and a kind of a week-long festival that really kicked off the spring season in Ireland, and the kind of the arrival of tourists into the country, perhaps, and we're a warm, welcoming people. We love that. And as I was saying, it has changed. Like when I was even growing up, it was probably at the tail end of it, but it was a much more subdued event in many ways. People kind of celebrated at home with their families. You always had the day off. I think as time has gone on, we have seen it grow. I think for a time it probably became, because it was never synonymous with maybe some of the stereotypes, that idea of green beer, or the idea of people, drinking uncontrollably, like waking up in the morning and, starting off their day with a can. That was never the case. But I do think it did for a time, perhaps. There were kind of some incidents where there was issues around maybe some drunken behavior. So they have actually curtailed the sale of alcohol until later in the day.
Oh, wow.
And so that's one thing that kind of has changed. So I think that the stereotype is that people are going to drink solidly. That's not necessarily the case. But what would be happening right now, if Ireland was, if there were no COVID restrictions, are big parades.
Mm.
So the biggest parade is in Dublin, and we would have visitors from all over the world. So you would have huge number of people from America, kind of Irish American marching bands, Irish American dancers, all sorts would be here. It's a huge parade that takes place right through the center of Dublin. People come out to see the parade, trying to get a spot to actually see the parade. You've got to get out really early in the morning, and it goes all the way through. And like there are lots of different kind of floats, and that is the big celebration. That's the major piece. But they have added in all sorts of kind of festivities around that. So over the last few years, in that pre-COVID world, you had what was known as the Céilí Mór. A Céilí is a dance, right? So people would get together and go to the Céilí. It's a night of dancing and celebration, and the Céilí Mór is the big dance. And so this used to take place up on St. Stephen's Green, and you'd have hundreds, if not 1,000 people there, kind of all dancing together and celebrating. And that was always great to see, and see people trying to learn Irish dancing wherever they were from in the world, and kind of come together and just enjoy the merriment of it. Nobody was particularly worried how good you were at learning the steps, but that was something that was always kind of built around it. And there were treasure hunts that had started for children, and to kind of maybe teach them a little bit more about Ireland and Irish culture as they got the different kind of clues along the way. And it would be spread out in different parts of the city, and you'd see so many kind of people from all around the world here. People, Italians, people from Spain, from France, people just from everywhere, just just a sea of green. That's another thing I probably should mention, that where in America, where you get pinched for not wearing green, I have no idea where that came from, because that is definitely not something that ever existed in Ireland. You don't have to wear green, but a lot of people definitely wear green on the day, and you'll see people with the shamrock painted on their faces. And so that's in Dublin. But around the country, the nice part is that the smallest villages will have a parade. Okay. So there's some really tiny parades, like where they kind of go, maybe 3 or 4 houses just deliberately, and they'll all parade through. And you will have local floats, and a lot of the local parades are great, because they will look to, we like to, I suppose, we're a wry sense of humor in Ireland, and we love to kind of make fun of different things. So events that will have happened during the year, people will parody, or a lot of satire, and they'll make their own homemade floats kind of celebrating those events. And so you'll have those along with kind of other floats, like a lot of celebrating, obviously, of farming. I can tell you a lot of farm machinery, or floats kind of highlighting what farmers are doing for the locality. Not too many live animals, I would have to say, but you would occasionally see maybe a goat or something on a float, some animal that isn't going to get too spooked or thereabouts. And the kind of what you would see as well in a lot of those local parades is people who are famous in that locality leading that parade.
Hmm.
So, for example, a couple of years ago, I know that Mike Ross, who was an Irish rugby player, led the parade in my hometown. He's
Oh, wow.
from my hometown, so it's a nice kind of honor that people in the locality get to lead their local parade. So the parade is the big event, and then that tends to go on in, say, the early afternoon, or maybe, like, say, would begin at noon and would kind of end at kind of 2 o'clock. And then in Dublin, you have, over the last few years, kind of had other things built in. So concerts taking place in the evening, fireworks displays, things like that. And as I said, in Dublin, it really has become a kind of a week-long celebration of Ireland.
Hmm.
Around those local areas, it would be much more just the day. But in Galway, there is a group called Mockness,
Hmm.
and Mockness, again, it's an Irish term, but Mockness do these they're kind of they're giant paper mache heads, and they look like the various celebrities. So U2 are usually there, but in the Galway parade, they'll always have the Mockness heads, and they'll generally again have, say, whoever has been kind of very famous that year. So if somebody, a celebrity has been in the news, or an Irish politician, or an Irish sports person, they'll generally be a Mockness head of that person. So that's out in Galway. So yeah, just a giant kind of celebration that takes place, but the parade being at the center of it.
That's funny. That's crazy that there's so much going on for, for all the different parts of the country, and that, you all celebrate in very similar ways, but at the same time, very different ways, depending on where you're at. That's so cool. And it's very different than is different than the United States in a couple different ways. Like we celebrate, so to compare it to our national holiday, Independence Day, we celebrate it on local levels and on large levels as well. But we have very different, like, we don't have parades very often unless you're part of like a really large city, or we don't have we don't have like massive celebrations in the sense that we have like the entire town involved. It's usually more like we have, neighborhood parties maybe, or we have like small gatherings and that kind of stuff. But that's about all it gets. I'm wondering if that's more of the characteristic of, like the United States tends to be a little bit more like, hey, we'll go do our own thing, and Ireland tends to be more like, hey, let's all hang out together. We're all friendly here. It's interesting to see how the difference there kind of lines up.
Yeah, I suppose it's the size of things in Ireland as well. So it's
Hmm.
it's easy for the community to maybe get together, but it,
Mm.
it doesn't matter. From the smallest village, like, genuinely, they love to nearly compete to see who can have the shortest parade. But from the smallest village through to those kind of medium-sized towns, and right through to the larger cities,
Mm.
um, they will all have a parade, and the community will come together. And they show them on TV. Like, one of the great things is the news. If the news was on and tonight, and we didn't have the COVID restrictions, I would be able to see all of these parades. Now social media means that you can kind of see them on Twitter anyway, but one of the pieces was they would always send reporters to various kind of towns around the country, so you'd get to see what was being celebrated in different areas. And sometimes some of those parades, like the parody pieces, will be very local.
Hmm.
So it might be somebody in the town who's famous, or somebody in the town who's kind of made a name for themselves, and maybe not in the best of ways, and they would be parodied during the parade. But it was always a big part of thing that the love of satire and the love of the absurd shines through.
Yeah, that's so great. It's always nice to see, countries able to have like a sense of humor during their celebrations and kind of poke fun at, things that happen, even, even if it's their own people. That's something that I think the United States could learn from. But it's funny to hear, even the differences between our celebrations of St. Patrick's Day itself. You mentioned that in Ireland, it's kind of almost a like a misconception that, the entire holiday is dedicated to drinking, because in the United States, it's basically an excuse for drinking all day. Like that's kind of what it turns into here, which I really wish that we could adapt some of those, kind of Irish customs in our celebrations, just to, for one, honor the the actual celebration, and for two, just, to get away from all of the drinking. But yeah, no, it's like how you described, what people think St. Patrick's Day is, wearing green and drinking green beer and just like drinking all day and just partying. That's exactly how it is in the United States. Like that's exactly how every party that I've ever seen, on whether it be on TV or just parties that I've been to, or people, like parties I've heard about, that's all it is in the United States. So it's funny to hear that, you know what people think is how things are really in Ireland is just how we do it here, just because either that's just because that's how the United States is, or that's because that's how we think it's supposed to be, because we don't really know how you guys celebrate.
I think some of it is probably it's driven by the stories I think people have heard.
Mm,
The Irish diaspora are all over the world, and a lot of them, left a long time ago. And even, America was much more developed.
mm,
So I'm imagining somebody who left Connemara in the west of Ireland, like a rural place, and they arrive into New York City,
mm,
into this like concrete jungle, this urban megalopolis. And to them, of course, they were going to tell everyone that they met about this rural bucolic nation that they came from. And
mm.
so stories kind of take on a life of their own. And so you get the green beer, and I've seen that some cities dye their river green,
Huh.
and just kind of green just becomes synonymous with it. And none of that exists in Ireland, because you didn't need to, you were here, so you didn't
Mm,
need to necessarily do that. Now, we definitely have seen, with the kind of influx of tourists in recent years, there's an area in Dublin called Temple Bar, and that is absolutely packed on St. Patrick's Day.
mm,
And there's play. I mean, there still is plenty of drinking, but I don't think most people set out. Again, it's in Ireland, the pub is a place where you go to meet friends,
mhm,
and you might get drunk as a consequence of meeting with your friends. But the aim when you're going out is not to get absolutely hammered as such. Like, you're not going out going, yeah, shots, shots, shots.
mm,
It's not that. It is sitting, having fun, and I don't know if I mentioned that the last time. Like, if you went into an Irish pub and compared an Irish pub to maybe an Irish American pub,
mhm,
or the way in which an Irish pub is imagined in America, like there's no singing. Like, there's no, if you go into an Irish pub in Ireland, like a real, what we would consider kind of, an old man pub, as we call them in ways, but like it's just the sound of people talking. And there's no dancing. There's not going to be any major food. You might get a packet of crisps, or as we call them, potato chips, for you guys. But that's, it's a place that you gather with your friends. It's not a place where you would go for a big meal, or that you go to listen to music. Those type of pubs certainly exist, and again, in Temple Bar you'll get that kind of more than elsewhere. But really, like, it's wonderful to walk into a pub and just to hear the sound of people talking and laughing. That to me that's what makes pubs special. That's the magic in pubs.
Yeah, no, I could definitely get behind that, because I mean, I'm personally not someone who really drinks. I not just because I'm technically not of legal age, but also just because I have no interest in it. Like my roommates, my friends will go out and party, and they, like you mentioned, they go to bars, and like they go to parties just to get drunk. They're not there for the social aspect of it, or maybe they are, but like they're more focused on the drinking than on the actual interactions. I never understood that. Like, I've always looked at outgoings as more of, it's a social event, you're there with your friends, like that's what you're supposed to be there for. So I would definitely appreciate the Irish, style of doing that a lot more than how we do it here. So I definitely, and I think it's interesting that, Ireland is almost like regarded as like the number one country for, alcoholism and all that kind of stuff, when really that's not really an accurate characteristic of how you guys act over there. It's more along the lines of, you're just very social, and like you said, it's almost like a byproduct of being social, is that kind of stuff just happens on its own, but it's not nearly to the degree that everyone likes to think it is.
and not to the extent, I don't think. I not to say, obviously it happens and it exists, but I would say like it wouldn't be uncommon for people to go to the pub and just have one or two drinks and then head off home.
Hmm.
But to maybe people outside of Ireland, and they hear, that somebody, that Johnny went to the pub, 3 times this week, they think, gee, Johnny must be a raging alcoholic because Johnny's drinking, himself under the table every night. And it's not that. You like sometimes, yeah, you say, like, we have a joke, like, I'll go for one. But one might mean one. That might just mean a quick drink after work, catch up with a friend, and then I gotta go.
Hmm.
Or one might mean, you meet the person in the pub at 6 o'clock, and suddenly it's 9 o'clock, and you're like, oh my god, where did the time go? And you've had your 4 or 5 pints in.
Hmm.
But that's a rare enough occurrence.
Hmm.
But where I suppose a lot of people maybe around the world might go to a cafe to meet their friends, or they might go to a restaurant, or they might have friends over to their house. That it's much less so in Ireland that you would have, particularly say workmates and stuff, that you would have them around to your house. You would tend to go to the pub. That's where you socialize, and then you head off from there. But I can imagine how the stories, if somebody went to America, or they went to Australia, or they went to Italy, and they said, oh yeah, sure, I'd usually meet my friends, in the pub three times or 4 times a week. People would think that would sound like, oh my god, you must drink an inordinate amount. But that could genuinely mean they had 3 drinks that week. It
Hmm.
might mean a lot more. It could do, absolutely, but it might mean that they had 3 drinks.
Huh. That's interesting. And like, that's such a cool idea because, like you said, like that would be interpreted here as, oh, you went to a bar 4 times this week. Like you have a problem. We need to take care of this because I mean, people might act that way in the United States where they go to bars just for the social aspect, but that tends to be not the case here. People, if you go to a bar 4 times a week, then you are getting like plastered 4 times a week. And that's like, that typically is, I'm guessing that's kind of the case in a lot of other countries too, which might be why they automatically assume, if you go to somewhere where it's a social environment, but where alcohol is available multiple times in a single week, that could potentially mean that you're indulging yourself a little bit too much. But it's interesting to hear that that's not really the focus in Ireland as much as it is, at least here. I can't speak for other countries, obviously, but that's interesting. One of the things I wanted to kind of dive into, and this is another, myth busting, if you will, about Ireland. I'm kind of curious. So obviously the color green is associated with Ireland, is associated with St. Patrick's Day, all that kind of stuff. Like you mentioned, in other countries we wear green, and we get pinched if we don't for some reason. I wish I knew why that was. But you said that Ireland, you're not required to wear green, and green isn't as big of a deal because you already live there. Is green kind of like the national color, if you will, because of your flag, because of your country? Like where did green come into all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is the national color of Ireland, and it
Mhm.
is. I mean, you'll hear talk of 40 shades of green, and when I have people from around the world, they come to Ireland, and if once they kind of get outside of the Dublin as a major city, they're like, oh my god, this country is so green. And that's the temperate climate that we have.
Mhm.
It I guess for your listeners in North America, Ireland essentially lives right between 35 and 70. Okay.
Wow.
And that's, I mean, I'm being a little bit playful there. Yeah, of course, sometimes it will get below freezing, but
Mhm.
not for long generally. And it will it sometimes obviously get above 70? Yeah. Well, again, really our summers are, we live in the kind of high 60s, low 70s, up to kind of up towards 80. Like
Mhm.
anything in the 80s in Ireland is that's absolutely a heat wave, I can tell you.
Hmm.
So that, I mean, and that's why, like, there's a lot of jokes in Ireland about, like, it rains all the time. It doesn't, but we get rain a lot of days, but not a whole lot of rain. But again,
Mm,
that's what keeps the country so green. So Ireland, it's always been associated with Ireland because of that. And it is on the flag, to represent the nationalist or community. I mean, that's what the flag represents. The green is the nationalist, the orange is the loyalist community, and
mm,
the white is the peace between the two. So
mm.
it's even represented in the flag. But I'm, as I sit here with you today, I'm wearing green. Your listeners won't be able to see that, but I am. So it's not like people don't wear it. They absolutely do. It's just not maybe the prerequisite that it is in America. Because if I don't wear it, nobody's going to pinch me, or nobody's going to slag me, or nobody's going to say to me, hey, you're not wearing any green. I might be, and a lot of people will, just because it is St. Patrick's Day. But if
Mhm.
if you don't, it's your choice to. There are no consequences to
Yeah.
not wearing green.
That's so funny, which I mean, honestly, I am not wearing green, so I probably better put something on before I go outside today. But yeah, no, it's so crazy how we adapt these customs that have nothing to do with the original holiday or the original celebration in any way. Like, I always like growing up, I always assumed like, okay, well maybe St. Patrick like really liked green and he punished people who didn't wear green for some reason. Like, why else would we get pinched for not wearing green? It never made any sense to me. But hearing that you don't have an answer either makes me wonder if we just made that up just to play with people.
Yeah, I'd love to know. Maybe one of your listeners knows the origins of pinching people for not wearing green, because it doesn't appear to have emerged on this little green island. I can tell you.
Yeah, well, yeah. If any of you know, where that strange custom came from, please let us know because I would definitely like to know the answer to that.
Yeah,
And
and
then
me too.
so one other thing I wanted to touch on in terms of the kind of clearing up like the difference in customs is like you mentioned people often have like shamrock painted on their faces. I was curious where the shamrock symbol came from with in terms of Irish history if you happen to know.
Well, the story that's told and why it's so synonymous with Ireland and with St. Patrick's Day is it's a Catholic tradition, because it was that St. Patrick used the shamrock to highlight the Trinity.
Mm,
So for those listeners who might not be familiar with Catholicism is say like, and I'm probably butchering it here, but essentially believes that in the divine Trinity,
mhm,
the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and
mhm,
three separate but equally the same entity. And so that's where the shamrock came from, the three different distinct leaves, which are still part of the same plant, represented the Trinity. And so
yeah,
that's why the shamrock has become so synonymous with St. Patrick and with Ireland. It's not like there's loads and loads of shamrock everywhere. Now there's plenty of it, but it's not like if I walked outside my house right now, I'll see a lot more grass and
mhm,
trees than I will shamrock, even if I was in the countryside. It's obviously here, and there's enough of it. But yeah, that is where it came from. And that, I mean, St. Patrick's Day was very much a Catholic holiday for a long time, and Ireland was very much a Catholic country. That has certainly changed over the particularly since the 80s, and especially the 90s.
mm.
But that is the reasoning behind the shamrock. I think if you spoke to a lot of people now, they may not even know exactly where it came from. They just know that the shamrock is there, and it's something easy to paint on somebody's face.
Huh. That's so interesting. Yeah, like I said, I always grew up like never knowing, what the shamrock represented or where it came from. And actually, I am Catholic and I was raised Catholic, but I was never really told that story growing up. So I'm not sure if that's just like an Irish Catholicism kind of tradition, or if that's something that we just don't really talk about as much here, or kind of where that got lost. That's a really interesting story.
Yeah, it might well be. I mean, what's interesting everywhere is how different, even like within religion, like Catholicism is different in Ireland than it is in Italy
Mhm.
and in Poland and in the United States and in, say, Latin and South America. So it takes on that distinct local flavor. And, there are local saints and there are local miracles and there are local customs that people will adhere to. And I mean, St. Patrick's, for example, St. Patrick's Day, always falls in Lent.
Hmm.
For listeners who might not be familiar, I don't know if Lent is something that is observed outside of Catholicism, but certainly in Catholicism, that idea that you make a sacrifice or you give something up for 40 days during the period of Lent, in the lead up to Easter, is very strong.
Hmm.
And culturally, that is very strong in Ireland, even though Catholicism, the country would only be notionally Catholic now. That idea of Lent and people giving something up is still a cultural piece. People will
Huh.
still do that, even if they're not a practicing Catholic. But St. Patrick's Day is a day where you can break that. So if you've given up chocolate for Lent, then you are allowed to have chocolate on St. Patrick's Day. Whatever it is that you have given up, you have 24 hours in the middle of Lent where you can indulge and enjoy whatever it is that you have sacrificed for Lent. So that is an interesting piece in and of itself, that there was like people in Ireland didn't have to go the 40 days. They were like, okay, I have to make it to St. Patrick's Day, and then after St. Patrick's Day I just have to make it to Easter.
That's so funny. I like that a lot better than the way that we do it, because obviously we had to wait all 40 days. It'd be nice to have that little break for St. Patrick's Day, which I might just start following that rule and just say I'm studying Irish Catholicism. That's it. I'm just but
I like your thinking.
but yeah, that's so interesting. And it's interesting to me that I was actually going to ask this question, but you already kind of answered it for me, that some Catholic rituals even follow through with people who don't study, who don't practice the religion. Like the idea of Lent is something that, like you said, is mostly restricted to Catholicism. But being a mostly historically Catholic country, you guys have kind of just retained that as part of your culture. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that you will see a lot of what becomes ritual, and it
Mhm.
carries over in the same way that many of the kind of Catholic high points in the Catholic calendar
Mhm.
are points that were previously maybe pagan holidays or local, like for example, like we know that Jesus wasn't born in December, like the
Right.
25th of December, right? But it made sense to celebrate it, because that festival of bringing everyone together,
Mhm.
which is what Christmas was to celebrate, it already existed. So
Mhm.
why would you not use that point? It exists. People are familiar with it. You look to incorporate it in, and there are moments. And on the other side now, in Ireland, as it moves to a more secular country, there are still pieces that will exist from our kind of Catholic heritage, that people are familiar with. So it would have been a thing here, that people would not have eaten meat on a Friday a lot of the time, up until particularly into the 80s and 90s. So you'll still see, fish sales on Fridays go way up. So that exists. You'll still see people, even if they mightn't be practicing Catholics, again, will tend to bless themselves when they pass a church or a graveyard.
Hmm.
And even if people maybe aren't, say, practicing Catholics, there is still a tendency in Ireland to have your child baptized.
Hmm.
The Catholic Church is still very involved in running the schools, the hospitals, and so people will do that. So you might not be a weekly practicing, or really very, very rarely, but when people go home at Christmas time, they would tend to go to mass. If the children are in school, they would tend to make their first communion and their confirmation. So those things are still in place, again changing slowly, as Ireland changes, but those things would still be very much in place.
Hmm. That's interesting. So that actually sounds a bit more like my hometown, because I'm kind of from a small, small-ish farming town, and most of the people who live there are Portuguese or Mexican, so very, very Catholic oriented, community there. And we have Catholic churches everywhere. I mean, you can't turn a corner without seeing a Catholic church somewhere. And I'm not sure they're not quite as involved in like the schools or the hospitals as maybe they are in Ireland, but we do still see a lot of Catholic involvement with certain community activities, and that is kind of a custom, is that even if you're not a heavily practicing Catholic, that you got your kids baptized, that they would still practice some Catholic traditions. Like I grew up in a family that wasn't super heavily practicing. We went to church occasionally, but we weren't most necessarily the most devout Catholics. And we were all still baptized. We all would still practice Lent. Every year we'd all still practice the certain Catholic traditions that surround most like the holidays and that kind of stuff. We practice like the Easter customs and all that. But it's interesting to hear that like that's just kind of how things are for for a lot of like non like you said, non-practicing Catholics in Ireland. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I suppose in Ireland as well, so some of the major migration, especially early on, was from Poland, which is obviously another very Catholic country, and so you still had the Poles observing many of the same rituals, some differences, but many of the same. So that probably continued it for another while as well.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, no, that's all really, really cool to hear. I love hearing about like, no matter what the history is or matter what the, what the religious ties are, it's always interesting to hear how different countries celebrate a lot of the same customs and a lot of different customs, but are supposed to be celebrating the same thing. So that's always cool to me. So I did have one last major point on our, oh, sorry. I don't know if you were done on that point. Okay. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. No, we can definitely move on to your last question.
So yeah, my last major point, because obviously this is a podcast about agriculture, about food, about all of the things that go into producing food, and the different uses for agricultural products. And Ireland, obviously being the the agricultural country that it is, and its history with agriculture, and with ties to the land and all that sort of thing, what kind of food and what kind of ties to agriculture can we see from your average St. Patrick's Day celebration, or just the holiday, or Ireland as a whole? Because I know we kind of talked about in the last episode going into Irish agriculture, and we didn't really get a chance to. So let's use this as our opportunity to kind of dive into that.
So yeah, I mean, it very much, agriculture still plays such a huge role in Ireland, and it is still so culturally impactful. And that's what I was saying about the parades, that you will see farmers participate, you will see tractors, you will see trailers, you will see last year's hay bales, whatever is left over, might be on tractors, and kind of people sitting on them and playing instruments and things like that. There isn't, and again, I think this is interesting, because I think in the United States there is this idea that that there is that kind of a traditional Irish dish, is it the what is it that I can't even think of it, because it's not something that we have over here. Whenever I go, it's not bacon, but it's similar to bacon, that is, it's always cooked in America, and they think that they were told that it's an Irish dish, and it's just not something that's had over here. And I'm struggling, because it's not, there is no one Irish dish, I suppose,
Hmm.
is what I'm saying. Like Irish food tends, I mean, it's changed and changing, but one of the things is that it's still very much meat and two veg and potatoes, any number of potatoes, any type of potatoes. That is a stereotype that rings true. I can tell you, I have yet to meet a potato I didn't like in any way, shape, or form. And Irish people eat a phenomenal amount of potatoes. So you would very often see at a dinner, be it on St. Patrick's Day or be it just on a Sunday, you would have perhaps mashed potato, roast potato, and potentially boiled potatoes as well. So it wouldn't be unusual to have three types of potato. And I remember ordering three types of potato in a Cracker Barrel when I was traveling in America at one point, and the waitress was like, that's three types of potatoes, sir. I said, yep, that sounds good to me. So that is a stereotype that I can tell you that lives on, and that would be very much part of it. Irish people also love chips, what we call chips, what you call French fries. They can go with anything. Chips can be used on at any time.
Which is
So
another
I
type of
think
potato.
that the other thing that Irish people are probably yeah, exactly. The other thing Irish people are probably very proud of is our dairy products. And I know that there was a tariff on dairy products being imported, Irish dairy products being imported into America. And I see that there has been a stay put on that tariff for the moment. But Irish people are very proud of our dairy products. We believe that, we have some of the best dairy products in the world, the butter, the milk, the cream. And I think that the other, it's funny because I think America has this perception that only Britain drinks tea, whereas Irish people drink tea as frequently, if not more frequently, than the UK. I have a cup of tea in front of me right now. I don't know what number cup this is today, but I've lost track. It's that piece that, like, whenever you're together, especially at home or with friends, because again, what I was saying earlier was you wouldn't tend to bring workmates to your house a lot of the time. So if you're with friends or family in a house, everyone sits around and has tea. Tea is what everyone goes to. If there is good news, if there is bad news, if you're just hanging out, do you want a cup of tea? You'll always hear that. Do you want a cup of tea? Do you want a cup of tea? Do you want a cup of tea? Irish people love tea, and tea is a staple of the Irish diet, certainly. I think the food offerings have improved immensely. I remember there was a comedian I really love called Bill Hicks, and Bill, he passed away from pancreatic cancer in the early 90s, but I listened to him. Obviously, I never got to see him. I was too young, but he used to joke about, like, coming to Ireland and the UK and needing to tell people that you don't boil pizza. But that has improved, and I think that the quality again of our ingredients kind of lends itself to cuisine from around the world. So we like to think that if we have people from Mexico cooking Mexican food, that they're using incredible quality ingredients. But that is the nice thing. Like, again, if I was, Dublin was open up right now and I was able to go and enjoy the St. Patrick's Day parade, there is no reason that I couldn't be eating a burrito whilst doing it. There will certainly be plenty of Guinness consumed. Even with the country, even at the parades not going ahead, if I opened my window beside me here, I could nearly throw a stone at the Guinness brewery, and you'll certainly smell the brewery. You'll smell the hops from the brewery kind of waft over the city. And the interesting thing, I suppose, is probably because Guinness was such a big brewery, there are a number of other breweries around the area as well, distilleries. So the Teeling's Whiskey Distillery is close by. There's another Roe and Co. Where they make whiskey and gin. So there are a number of kind of distilleries in the area. But yeah, Irish people. So whilst there isn't a national dish, maybe there are local kind of delicacies
Mhm.
within different places in Cork and in Dublin, but there's no one national dish that corned beef. That was the what I was looking for. Corned beef and cabbage. I'm always told in America that, oh, do you guys eat corned beef and cabbage? I said, no, never, no, but I'm not aware of anyone who eats this. I don't even know. I didn't even know it was such a thing. But there you go. So there's no one national dish, but Irish people are fiercely proud of the fact that there's a feeling that our ingredients and our produce are really really top quality.
Mm.
And they're, because of the size of the country, again, you don't get the kind of factory farming that you would in maybe kind of other countries, just because of the sheer size and scale of things. So
Mhm.
there's a real feeling of pride around that.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, that's so cool to hear. So obviously, like in the United States, we have American food, hamburgers, hot dogs, typically things that have been associated with American culture for as long as the United States has been around, pretty much. So I know that you said that obviously like potatoes are like a big part of your diet and tea and all that kind of stuff. But there's no, like, if I were to say like if I were to say like I want some Irish food, what does that like what would come to mind for that kind of thing?
A stew probably is what I'd be pointing you towards.
Okay.
But there again, some people would say it's the beef stew. Some people would say it's a lamb stew. So they're depending on where in the country you were, there
Mm,
would probably be an argument over that. So yeah, you'll go to pubs and you'll see kind of pub grub or Irish fare, but there's no really agreed there. Stew would be on there, certainly. Shepherd's pie would be on there. That's something, um we feel that it wasn't just the Brits that invented fish and chips. That's also something you get a lot in Ireland. But no, I've had this discussion because obviously working in the area of higher ed, working with a huge number of people from around the world, there's always the question, like, what should I get? I need some traditional Irish food. There's no there isn't something I could say is definitely go for that. There will be, like, the Dubs have coddle, and there's drisheen in Cork, which is pig's feet, which I'm not a fan. Like, I no thanks. But there's no there that wouldn't be agreed around the country. Whereas I could definitely say to you, have a pint of Guinness, have a pint of Murphy's,
mm.
and have a packet of crisps, Tayto crisps. That's probably much more of an Irish meal than anything I could point you towards and say, "Yep, that's it. That's the one for you, Brendan."
Interesting. That's so crazy to hear. I mean, like, food, I think, is one of those things that's so culturally distinct. Everywhere you go, there's like if I were to go to Mexico, there's obviously like there's food that is distinctly attributed to being Mexican food. There's British, there's British meals that are associated with being British meals. I think it's so interesting that Ireland doesn't really have like a distinct, like, yep, this is our meal. Like, it's kind of just you have different foods that are like, yeah, we mostly claim these things, but none of those are like purely Irish foods. That's so cool. It's
Hmm.
it's just it's a weird thought, but it is really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's certainly interesting, and it's something that I've discussed, with people, because, like,
Mhm.
why is that the case when there are so many things that we do claim, and that
Right.
we do kind of loudly shout from the rooftops saying, that's ours, or we invented that, or whatever it happens to be.
Mhm.
Um, but when it comes to food, I mean, I don't know. The other thing to probably just mention in relation to this, and probably another reason why Ireland has that reputation for drinking, is the Irish word for whiskey. And again, I think is it I definitely have seen Family Guy, and I think a few other cartoons have kind of done this, the Irish inventing whiskey. And
Mhm.
it's like this futuristic world, and then whiskey emerges, and then Ireland does nothing after that. But the Irish word for whiskey is ishkabaha, and
Mm.
ishkabaha translates literally as water of life.
Oh.
So that is probably one of the reasons why people associate drinking with Ireland. But yeah, there you go.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, if you consider, whiskey your water of life, I could definitely see why people would associate you with drinking quite a bit. That's really funny. So in terms of the agricultural side of Ireland and the surrounding rural areas of Ireland, you already described some of the type of yeah, I can't talk today. The types of agriculture we would see. So potatoes, dairy, some of the crops used to create, whiskey and hops and those sorts of things. What does Irish agriculture really look like? If I were to go to like the rural areas of agriculture, what would I expect to see mostly?
So there are the middle, like probably you get a lot of market gardening in and
Mm,
around Dublin. Huge areas of market gardening and potatoes in kind of North County Dublin. That's
mhm,
where you would see a huge amount of that. If you went down into the middle of the country and down towards the south, that is known as the Golden Vale,
mm,
and the Golden Vale is considered like the best farming land in the country,
huh,
and people from Tipperary are very proud of that, understandably. But there you would get that's where a lot of the dairy produce comes from, is kind of that Tipperary and Cork, and into Kerry as well. The West is probably not as famous for farming. It's beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. I mean, there's nowhere in the world as beautiful, I think, as the west of Ireland and West Cork. But it's not great farming land. There, the was it Cromwell famously said essentially that there isn't enough water to drown a man, nor enough trees to hang him.
mm,
Um, that's Oliver Cromwell, who's not very popular in Ireland, who came over and kind of conquered the country for the British. But that kind of tells you about the west of the country. Scenically stunning, not great farming land.
mm,
Um, and then, but yeah, so that piece from Cork up through the center of the country, up into the Midlands, a little bit would be where you would get the dairy. We also have, though they're beginning to phase it out now. We would have a lot of bogland here,
mm.
and we used to farm peat.
Oh,
Um, so that was huge in Ireland for a long time, and there were some kind of tragic stories of that happening for my mother's area in County Kerry. Actually, there's talk of the moving bog,
mm,
and what's incredible, right, is this happened like 100 years ago. I'm not sure exactly when, but this is in rural County Kerry. I mean rural as you can get.
mm,
And people still to this day talk about how essentially I don't know if you've ever seen how they cut turf,
mm,
but essentially they cut from the middle, and it's a giant trough
mm,
essentially, right? So they dig down into it and they dig for the middle. And what happened was it was an incredibly wet kind of period, like summer, autumn, and basically it built up and built up and built up, and eventually the walls of it gave way, and so
oh,
you had essentially a kind of a tsunami of peat and turf,
mm,
and bog, which wiped out a number of houses, and a number of families lost their lives, and it's still talked about. But yeah, that would exist in the west, and in parts of Kerry is bogland. So you're not going to be great for farming, but it was used. Like, we had a peat fired electricity power plant. I mean, that's how much peat we had in the country at one point.
wow.
But just because of the way, and I suppose the destructive nature and the way in which it has to be farmed, they're actually phasing out. There used to be peat briquettes that people would use to heat their homes, like in
Hmm,
an open fire, but they're actually phasing those out now. So yeah, I think probably. you would also have a significant amount of beef farming,
Mm.
and sheep as well. Those would be the main two in terms of meat processing. Beef would be, Irish beef is kind of very highly sought after around the world. We would say we would export a significant amount of Irish beef, particularly actually to the Middle East, which is interesting.
Hmm.
But that would be one of our major exports is beef, and also dairy products like Irish butter is kind of famous around the world. So if you came, you would see smaller farms then you would see some still, like especially out west, you would still see stone walls. Those are still a thing, because they last for so long. But it's difficult for farms in Ireland, because in America, you could have a farm the size of South Tipperary, which is a county in Ireland. So on a scale, they definitely struggle. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out in the future. But it's probably what they look to do is that niche kind of higher end, high quality market. I think that's probably what Ireland needs to look at.
Interesting. That's so interesting to hear because, obviously coming from a place where we grow pretty much everything, and we have, like you said, very large scale farms, and we have, a very diverse set of agriculture, available to us. It's interesting to hear how the different types of agriculture are broken up across, definitely a lot smaller of an area, obviously. But one of the questions I really had about that is, obviously you seem to be pretty knowledgeable on the agriculture going on in Ireland. Is that a common thing in Ireland for people to really? Because, like you mentioned, farmers tend to be part of a lot of your St. Patrick's Day parades, and this is kind of, tying it back to the St. Patrick's Day thing. Do people in Ireland have a pretty good grasp of how agriculture is working behind the scenes for them?
Um, to an extent, because we're still close to it. I don't know. Like, I grew up. My mother grew up on a farm. My uncle took over the farm, so I'm very close to it, which is
Mm,
probably why I would have knowledge of it. Now, my niece grew up in Dublin.
mm,
She's a Dub. She's grew up in, she knows the city, but she loves farming, and she actually did her internship in Moore Park, which is an agricultural research institute. I think we talked about that a little bit the last time, but she
mm.
did her internship there. That's what she wanted to do. So I do think that because people are close to it, there would be good knowledge. But maybe if you grow up in the city center, you are less likely to know about it now. But I think probably because people were so close to it previously, that it does it still exists. We have a crazy hailstorm here. I don't know if that's coming through on my mic, um, but
I
it
could
is.
hear it a
It's
little bit.
it's probably just as well that there isn't any St. Patrick's Day parade, because it sounds like Armageddon outside my window at the moment.
Yeah, no, we actually had a crazy hailstorm here just yesterday, and I was thinking the same thing. It's like, man, it's almost a good thing we're all locked inside. This is terrible. But yeah, no, that's crazy. It is nice to hear. Well, to your point, yeah, it's probably a good thing we're not having the the St. Patrick's Day parade after all. But it is nice to hear that agriculture is well celebrated in at least the smaller parts of Ireland. But because obviously in the United States, that's kind of a bit of an issue here. It's actually the whole reason I started the podcast, is because people don't really know where their food comes from. They're not having the proper conversations about what's going into their food and how it's being grown, and where it's coming from, and everything that goes into it, and all the steps it has to go through to get to their plate. And so that's really the whole reason I started this project in the first place. And so it's interesting to me to hear other countries have different situations. In that instance, obviously, in a lot of developing countries, they're mostly well aware of where their food comes from because they need to rely on it a lot more. I've kind of found that the less you rely on needing food all the time, the less you tend to know about where your food comes from, and the less you tend to care, honestly.
Yeah, I like, I suppose one of the, like, I'm a big fan of America. I love visiting America. I've Some of my best friends are from America, but one of the things that kind of terrifies me, honestly, when I go and visit is the food,
Hmm.
and the way in which thing, like, I'll go into the supermarket, right, and I'll pick up milk, and milk will be good for like months.
Hmm.
If I go to the supermarket, like, I just got milk earlier today. That's good until this day next week. That's as good as, like, that's as long as milk will last here.
Hmm.
And produce goes off a lot quicker. I
Hmm.
wonder about, like, what is being put into milk to allow it to remain good. Like, this is fresh milk. This isn't stuff. This isn't powdered milk.
Right.
Like, how does milk stay good for that long? That is a part that terrifies me a little bit. And
Hmm.
when I see things that don't go bad, like, food isn't supposed to last that long. What kind of
Hmm.
additives are you putting in that makes the food? And I know that isn't. I know there's really great quality, organic produce, but it feels like in the United States at the moment, you to spend significant amount of money to get kind of organic
Hmm.
produce.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the organic market is a lot smaller. It is growing, but it's a lot smaller than the conventional market. And like you said, it costs quite a bit more for for that same product, which a lot of that's reflected in how it's grown and the marketing of it and all that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's definitely a distinction, and I've learned that over time. There's a massive distinction between agricultural markets in the United States versus markets in other countries in terms of how the products are marketed, how they're sold, even how they're stored. Like I learned that refrigerated milk is not a very common thing in other countries, and in the United States is like one of the few countries that actually refrigerates their milk. And so that it was kind of something I found interesting. Eggs are the same way. Eggs are often not refrigerated in other countries. They're kind of just left out, and they're fine. So there's definitely, I'm not sure what, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I know that obviously that there's some products that we use preservatives for in the United States, and the preservatives have been, kind of a controversial piece for a little while now. That's something that we could talk about for forever because there's a lot to say on it. But there's a lot, there's a lot of differences in the styles of agriculture between the different countries that I've learned from, and their differences tend to contribute to not just how the food is marketed in the store, but also how the consumers feel about it. Because consumers in the United States, they may not even think twice about the milk lasting a month or two, whereas like you said, in other countries that's like their primary concern because that's not how it works and where they come from. So there's massive distinctions in how we understand our food and our food systems that just those conversations aren't being had here. And I think that they definitely need to be had on a worldwide scale, and kind of have an agreement on you know not just what we should do about our food, but should we have a better understanding of what is being done about our food, and all of those things as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, you should know what's going on your table and and into your body. But listeners will probably be amazed that, like, I take photographs of, like, the dates on the milk and I'll text Zach. I go, lads, look at this. The milk is good for 2 months. What's going on? And like, we've a WhatsApp group. People are like, no way. Like, that can't be right. So it is a talking. Know that it is a talking point
Hmm.
amongst Irish people, definitely to look at it. And some of that is probably, again, because we are small. You do tend to know who the producers are. You do tend to have some connection to somebody. So that probably definitely plays a role in all of it, certainly.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, no, it is good to hear that conversations are had on more of a common scale in other countries. And I, like you said, it probably would make sense for a country that's a bit smaller and a bit closer to agriculture to have better conversations about that kind of stuff. I am hoping that at some point the United States kind of gets to that level, because there's people who live in my farm town that don't even know that the milk comes from a cow, and they could see a cow across the street from them. And so that's something that I wish was not an issue, but it definitely is something that needs to be worked on.
Well, hopefully you're doing good work with the podcast. So long may that continue.
Well, thank you. I definitely appreciate that. So, But yeah, I think those are all the questions I really had. And as always, you're welcome to add anything else that you want to add about St. Patrick's Day, about Ireland, about your own projects. You remind people where they could find you and all that kind of stuff. And I'll be happy to link all your stuff down in the description.
Sure. Well, look, firstly, thanks again for having me on. And given that it's a lockdown St. Patrick's Day, it's nice to just have the opportunity to talk to people around the world. And I hope that listeners enjoy or are enjoying their own St. Patrick's Day. And just hopefully, when these COVID restrictions lift, I will be able to meet you someday, either in America or in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are listeners who are interested in higher ed, definitely check out Adventures in Advising. If there are listeners who are interested in the NFL, check out the Irish NFL show. And yeah, thanks again, Brendan. And look, enjoy your St. Patrick's Day as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on and teaching us all about your culture and kind of the origins of the holiday that we all celebrate, but often don't really know why we celebrate. I definitely hold as we mentioned in the last episode together, I definitely hold Irish culture near and dear to my heart because I kind of grew up learning about it and listening to a lot of stories about it through my family. So yeah, that's definitely awesome to hear about. And as soon as we're able to, I would love to go to Ireland and see all the Irish countryside, learn about more stuff from like a first person perspective. So you might have to be my tour guide if I ever get to go over there.
That sounds good. You definitely have a tour guide if you come over.
Awesome. And if you ever make your way over to California, I'll be happy to take you to any farms that we have in the area, and you can come see our football stadiums too, and we'll definitely talk about that.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Colin, for coming on and teaching us all about St. Patrick's Day and Ireland. And I hope that you had a good time, and I hope that all of our listeners had a good time learning all about this awesome holiday and just the awesomeness that is Ireland as a whole. So thanks so much for everyone who's tuning in and listening. And Colin, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, so thanks all again. Hope to see you all next week. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.